The Sirens of Titan, Chapter 5, Letter from an Unknown Hero. We can make the center of a man's memory virtually as sterile as a scalpel fresh from an autoclave. But grains of new experience begin to accumulate on it at once. These grains in turn form themselves into patterns not necessarily favorable to military thinking. Unfortunately, this problem of recontamination seems insoluble. Dr. Morris N. Castle, Director of Mental Health from Mars. Unc's formation halted before a granite barrack. Before a barrack in a perspective of thousands, a perspective that ran to seeming infinity on the iron plane. Before every 10th barrack was a flagpole with a banner snapping in the keen wind. The banners were all different. The banner that fluttered like a guardian angel over Unc's company area was very gay. Red and white stripes, and many white stars on a field of blue. It was Old Glory, the flag of the United States of America on Earth. Down the line was the red banner of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Past that was a wonderful green, orange, yellow and purple banner showing a lion holding a sword. It was the flag of Ceylon. And past that was a ball that was red on a white field, the flag of Japan. The banners signified the countries that the various Martian units would attack and paralyze when the war between Mars and Earth began. Unc saw no banners until his antenna let his shoulders sag, let his joints loosen and let them fall out. He gawked at the long perspective of barracks and flagpoles. The barrack before which he stood had a large number painted over the door. The number was 576. Some part of Unc found the number fascinating, made Unc study it. Then he remembered the execution, remembered that the red-headed man he had killed had told him something about a blue stone on Barrack 12. Inside Barrack 576, Unc cleared his rifle, found it an extremely pleasant thing to do. He found, moreover, that he still knew how to take the weapon apart, that much of his memory, at any rate, had not been wiped out at the hospital. It made him furtively happy to suspect that there were probably other parts of his memory that had been missed as well. Why, this suspicion should make him furtively happy. He didn't know why. He swabbed away his rifle's bore. His weapon was an 11mm German Mauser, single shot, a type of rifle that made its reputation when used by the Spaniards in the earthing Spanish-American War. All of the Martian Army's rifles were of about the same vintage. Martian agents were working quietly on Earth, had been able to buy up huge quantities of Mausers and British Enfields and American Springfields for next to nothing. Unc's squad mates were swabbing their bores too. The oil smelled good, and the oily patches, twisting through the rifling, resisted the thrust of the cleaning rod just enough for it to be interesting, and there was hardly any talk. No one seemed to have taken particular notice of the execution. If there had been a lesson in the execution of Unc's squad mates, they were finding the lesson as digestible as pablum. There had only been one comment on Unc's participation in the execution, and that had come from Sergeant Brackman. "You done all right, Unc," said Brackman. "Thanks," said Unc. "This man's done all right, didn't he?" Brackman said to Unc's squad mates. There had been some nods, but Unc had the impression that his squad mates would have nodded in response to any positive question, would have shaken their heads in response to any negative one. Unc withdrew the rod and patch, slipped his thumb under the open breech, caught the sunlight on his oily thumbnail. The thumbnail sent the light up to the ball. Unk put his eye to the muzzle and was thrilled by perfect beauty. He could have stared happily at the immaculate spiral of the rifling for hours, dreaming of the happy land whose round gate he saw at the other end of the bore. The pink under his oily thumbnail at the far end of the barrel made that far end seem a rosy paradise indeed. Someday he was going to crawl down the barrel to that paradise. It would be warm there, and there would be only one moon, Unk thought, and the moon would be fat, stately and slow. Something else about the pink paradise at the end of the barrel came to Unk, and Unk was puzzled by the clarity of the vision. There were 3 beautiful women in that paradise, and Unk knew exactly what they looked like. One was white, one was gold, and one was brown. The golden girl was smoking a cigarette in Unk's vision. Unk was further surprised to find that he even knew what kind of cigarette the girl was smoking. The golden girl, of course. It was a moonmist cigarette. "Sal Moonmist," Unk said out loud. It felt good to say that. It felt authoritative and shrewd. "Huh?" said a young coloured soldier, cleaning his rifle next to Unk. "What's that you say, Unk?" he said. He was 23 years old. His name was stitched in yellow on a black patch over his left breast pocket. Boaz was his name. If suspicions had been permitted in the army of Mars, Boaz would have been a person to suspect. His rank was only private first class, but his uniform, though regulation lichen green, was made of far finer stuff. It was much better tailored than the uniform of anyone around him, including the uniform of Sergeant Brackman. Everyone else's uniform was coarse, scratchy, held together by clumsy stitches of thick thread. And everyone else's uniform looked good only when the wearer stood to attention. When the wearer stood to attention. In any other position, an ordinary soldier found that his uniform tended to bunch and crackle, as though it was made of paper. Boaz's uniform, however, followed his every movement with silken grace. The stitches were numerous and tiny, and most puzzling of all, Boaz's shoes had a deep, rich, ruby luster. A luster that other soldiers could not achieve no matter how much they might polish their shoes. Unlike the shoes of anyone else in the company area, the shoes of Boaz was genuine leather from Earth. "You say something, Unk?" said Boaz. "Dump Moonmist, get rid of it," murmured Unk. The words made no sense to him. He had let them out simply because they wanted to be out so badly. "Sell," he said. Boaz smiled, ruefully amused. "Sell it, eh?" he said. "Okay, Unk, we'll sell it." He raised an eyebrow. "What are we going to sell, Unk?" There was something particularly bright and piercing about the pupils of his eyes. Unk found this yellow brightness, this sharpness of Boaz's eyes, disquieting. Increasingly so, as Boaz continued to stare. Unk looked away, looked by chance into the eyes of some of his other squadmates, found that their eyes to be uniformly dull. Even the eyes of Sergeant Brackman were dull. Boaz's eyes continued to bite into Unk. Unk felt compelled to meet their gaze again. The pupils were seeming diamonds. "You don't remember me, Unk," said Boaz. The question alarmed Unk for some reason. It was important that he not remember Boaz. He was grateful that he really didn't remember him. "Boaz, Unk," said the coloured man. "I'm Boaz." Unk nodded. "How do you do?" he said. "Oh, I don't do what you'd call real bad, bud," said Boaz. He shook his head. "You don't remember nothing about me, Unk?" "No," said Unk. His memory was nagging him a little now, telling him that he might remember something about Boaz, if he tried as hard as he could. He shushed his memory. "Sorry," said Unk, "my mind's blank." "You and me, we're buddies," said Boaz. "Boaz and Unk," said Unk. "You remember what the buddy system is, Unk?" said Boaz. "No," said Unk. "Every man in every squad," said Boaz. "He got a buddy. Buddies share the same foxhole, stick right close to each other in attacks, and cover each other. One buddy get in trouble hand to hand. One buddy get in trouble in hand to hand, the other buddy come and help. Slip a knife in. Ah, said Unc. Funny, said Boaz, what a man'll forget in the hospital, and what he'll still remember no matter what they do. You and me, we're trained as buddies for a whole year, and you done forgot that. And then you say that thing about cigarettes. What kind of cigarettes, Unc? I forget, said Unc. Try and remember now, said Boaz. You had it once. He frowned and squinted as though trying to help Unc remember. I think that it's so interesting what a man can remember after he's been to the hospital. Try and remember everything you can. There was a certain effeminacy about Boaz, in the nature of a cunning bully's chucking a sissy under the chin, talking baby to him. Okay. But Boaz liked Unc. That was in his manner too. Unc had the eerie feeling that he and Boaz were the only real people in the stone building, that the rest were glass-eyed robots, and not very well-made robots at that. Sergeant Brackman, supposedly in command, seemed no more alert and no more responsible, no more in command than a bag of wet feathers. Let's hear all you can remember, Unc, wheezed Boaz. Old buddy, he said, just remember all you can. Before Unc could remember anything, the pain that had made him get on with the execution hurt him again. The pain didn't stop. However, with the warning nip, while Boaz watched expressionlessly, the pain in Unc's head became a wanging, flashing thing. Unc stood, dropped his rifle, clawed at his head, reeled, screamed, and fainted. When Unc came to on the barrack floor, his buddy Boaz was daubing Unc's temples with a cold wash rag. Unc's squadmates stood in a circle around Unc and Boaz. The faces of the squadmates were unsurprised and unsympathetic. Their attitude was that Unc had done something stupid and unsoldierly, and so deserved what he got. They looked as though Unc had done something as militarily stupid as silhouetting himself against the sky, or cleaning a loaded weapon, or as sneezing on patrol, or contracting and not reporting a venereal disease, as refusing a direct order, or sleeping through reveille, as being drunk on guard, or drawing to an inside straight, as keeping a book or a live hand grenade in his footlocker, as asking who started the army anyway and why. Boaz was the only one who looked sorry about what happened to Unc. It was all my fault, Unc, he said. Sergeant Brackman, now pushed through the circle, stood over Unc and Boaz. What do you do, Boaz? Said Brackman. I was kidding him, Sergeant, said Boaz earnestly. I told him to try and remember back as far as he could. I never dreamed he'd go and do it. Ought to have more sense than to kid a man just back from hospital, said Brackman gruffly. Oh, I know it, said Boaz, full of remorse. My buddy, he said, God damn me. Unc, said Brackman. Unc, said Brackman. Didn't they tell you about remembering at the hospital? Unc shook his head vaguely. Maybe, he said. They told me a lot. That's the worst thing you can do, Unc, remembering back, said Brackman. That's what they put you in the hospital for in the first place. On account of you remembered too much. He made cups of his tubby hands, held them in... Okay. He made cups of his tubby hands, held in them the heartbreaking problem Unc had been. Holy smokes, he said. You were remembering so much, Unc. You weren't worth a nickel as a soldier. Unc sat up, laid his hand on his breast, found that the front of his blouse was wet with tears. He thought of explaining to Brackman that he hadn't really tried to remember back, that he had known instinctively that was a bad thing to do, but the pain had hit him anyway. He didn't tell Brackman that for fear that the pain would come again. Unk groaned and blinked away the last of the tears. He wasn't going to do anything he wasn't ordered to. As for you, Boaz, said Breckman, I don't know what a week's latrine duty would maybe teach you, something about horseplay with people just out of the hospital. Something formless in Unk's memory told Unk to watch the byplay between Breckman and Boaz closely. It's somehow important. A week, Sergeant? Said Boaz. Yes, by God, said Breckman. And then he shuddered and closed his eyes. Plainly, his antenna had just been giving him a little stab of pain. A whole week, Sarge? Said Boaz innocently. A day, said Breckman. And it was less a threat than a question. Again, Breckman reacted to the pain in his head. Starting when, Sarge? Said Boaz. Breckman fluttered his stubby hands. Never mind, he said. He looked rattled and betrayed and haunted. He lowered his head, as though better to fight the pain if it came again. No more horseplay, damn it, he said. His voice deep in his throat, and he hurried away, hurried into his room at the end of the barrack and slammed the door. The company commander, a Captain Arnold Burke, came into the barrack for a surprise inspection. Boaz was the first to see him. Boaz did what a soldier was supposed to do under such circumstances. Boaz shouted, "Attend hut!" Boaz did this, though. He had no rank at all. He is a freak of the military custom that the lowliest private can... It is a freak of the military custom that the lowliest private can command his equals and non-commissioned superiors to attention. If he is the first to detect the presence if he is the first to detect the presence of a commissioned officer in any roofed-over structure not in a combat area. So the antennas of the enlisted men responded instantly, straightened the man's backs, locked their joints, hauled their guts, tucked their butts, and made their minds go blank. Unk sprang up from the door, stood stiff and shivering. Only one man was slow about coming to attention. That man was Boaz. And when he did come to attention, there was something insolent and loose and leering about the way that he did it. Captain Burke, finding Boaz's attitude profoundly offensive, was about to speak to Boaz about it, but the captain no sooner got his mouth open than pain hit it between the eyes. The captain closed his mouth without having made a sound. Under the baleful gaze of Boaz, he came smartly to attention, did an about-face, heard a snare of a drum in his head, and marched out the barrack in step with the drum. When the captain was gone, Boaz did not put his squad mates at ease again. Though it was in his power to do so, he had a small control box in his right front trouser pocket that could make his squad mates do just about anything. The box was the size of a 1-pint hip flask, and like a hip flask, the box was curved to fit a body curve. Boaz chose to carry it in one hard, curved face on his thigh. The control box had 6 buttons and 4 knobs on it. By manipulating these, Boaz could control anybody who had an antenna in his skull. Boaz could administer pain in any amount to that person, and could bring them to attention, could make them hear a snare drum, could make them march, halt, fall in, fall out, salute, attack, retreat, hop, skip, and jump. Boaz had no antenna in his own skull. As free as it wanted to be. That's how free the will of Boaz was. Boaz was one of the real commanders of the Army of Mars. He was in command of the 1/10 of the force that was to attack the United States of America when the attack on Earth was mounted. Down the line were units trying to attack Russia, Switzerland, Japan, Australia, Mexico, China, Nepal, Uruguay. To the best of Boaz's knowledge, there were 800 real commanders of the Army of Mars, none of them with an apparent rank above Buck Sergeant. The nominal commander of the entire army, General of the Army's Borders, M. Pulsifer, was in fact controlled by, and at all times, by his orderly, Corporal Burt Wright. Corporal Burt Wright was the perfect orderly, carried aspirin for the general's almost chronic headaches. The advantages of a system of secret commanders were obvious. Any rebellion within the army would be directed against the wrong people. And in time of war, the army could exterminate the entire Martian officer class without disturbing the army itself in the least. 799, said Boaz out loud, correcting his own understanding of the number of real commanders. One of the real commanders was dead, having been strangled at the stake by Unk. The strangled man had been Private Stoney Stevenson, former real commander of a British attack unit. Stoney had become so fascinated by Unk's struggles to understand what was going on that he had begun unconsciously to help Unk think. Stevenson had suffered the ultimate humiliation for this. An antenna had been installed in his skull, and he had been forced by it to march to the stake like a good soldier, there to await his protégé. Boaz let his squad mates go on standing at attention, let them go on quivering and thinking nothing, seeing nothing. Boaz went to Unk's cot, lay down on it with his bag, lustrous shoes on the brown blanket. He folded his hands behind his head, arched his body like a bow. "Ah," said Boaz, somewhere between a yawn and a groan. "Ah, now, man," he said, letting his mind idle. "Goddamn now, man," he hesitated. And he said, "It was lazy nonsense talk." Boaz was a little bored with his toys. It occurred to him to have them fight each other, but the penalty for doing that if he got caught was the same penalty that Stoney Stevenson had. "Oh, now, man, really now, man," said Boaz loudingly. "God damn it, now, man," he said. "I got it made. You men got to admit that. Old Boaz is doing, how you might say, real fine." He rolled off the bed, landed on all fours, sprang to his feet with a panther-like grace. He smiled dazzlingly. He was doing everything he could to enjoy the fortunate position in his life that was his. "You boys ain't got it so bad," he said to his rigid squad mates. "You ought to see how we treat the generals if you think you's bad off." He chuckled and cooed. 2 nights ago, us real commanders got ourselves in an argument about which general could run the fastest. Next thing you know, we got all 23 generals out of bed, all bare-ass naked, and lined up. We raced them like horses. And then we put our money down and laid the odds. And then we sent them generals off like the devil was after them. General Stover, he done placed first, with General Harrison right behind him, and with General Mosher again behind him. Next morning, every general in the army was stiff as a board, and not one of them could remember a thing about the night before. Boaz chuckled and cooed again. And then he decided that his fortunate position in life would look a lot better if he treated it seriously. He showed what a load it was, showed how honoured he felt to have had a load like that. He held back judiciously. No, he hurled it back judiciously, hooked his thumbs under his belt and scowled. "Oh," he said, "it ain't all play by any means." He sauntered over to Unk, stood inches away from him, looked up and down. "Unk boy," he said, "I'd hate to tell you how much time I've spent thinking about you, worrying about you, Unk." Boaz rocked on his feet. "You will try and puzzle things out, won't you? You know how many times they had you in the hospital, trying to clean out that memory of yours. 7 times, Unk. You know how many times they usually have to spend on a man to get his memory cleaned out? Once. 1 time." Boaz snapped his finger under Unk's nose. "And that does it. 1 time. And the man never bothers himself about anything ever after." He shook his head wonderingly. "Not you, Unk." Unk shuddered. "I keeping you at attention too long, Unk?" said Boaz. He gritted his teeth. He couldn't forbear torturing Unk from time to time. For one thing, Unk had everything back on Earth, and Boaz had had nothing. For another thing, Boaz was wretchedly dependent on Unk, or would be when they hit Earth. Boaz was an orphan who had been recruited when he was only 14, and he didn't have the haziest notion as to how to have a good time on Earth. He was counting on Unk to show him how. "You want to know who you are, where you came from, what you were," said Boaz to Unk. Unk was still at attention, thinking nothing, unable to profit from whatever Boaz was trying to tell him. Boaz was talking for Unk's benefit anyway. Boaz was reassuring himself about the buddy who was going to be by his side when they hit Earth. Man, said Boaz, scowling at Unk, you were one of the luckiest men ever. Back there on Earth, man, you were the king. Like most pieces of information on Mars, Boaz's piece of information about Unk were underdeveloped. He could not say from where exactly the pieces had come. He had picked them out of the general background of noises in army life. And he was too good a soldier to go around asking questions and trying to round out his knowledge. A soldier's knowledge wasn't supposed to be round. So the Boaz didn't really know anything about Unk except that he'd been very lucky once. He embroidered on this. I mean, said Boaz, there wasn't anything you couldn't have. There wasn't anything you couldn't do. There was no place you couldn't go. And while Boaz stressed the marvel of Unk's good luck on Earth, he was expressing a deep concern for another marvel, his superstitious conviction that his own luck on Earth was sure to be rotten. Boaz now used 3 magical words that seemed to describe the maximum happiness a person could achieve on Earth. Hollywood nightclubs. He had never seen Hollywood. He'd never seen a nightclub. Man, he said, you were in and out of Hollywood nightclubs all day and all night long. Man, said Boaz to uncomprehending Unk, you had everything a man needs to really lead himself for life on Earth. And you knew how to do it too. Man, said Boaz to Unk, trying to conceal the pathetic formlessness of his aspirations. We're going to go to some fine places and order us up some fine things, and circulate and carry on with some fine people, and just generally have us a good whoop-de-doo, said Unk. Said Boaz. He seized Unk's arm, rocked him. Buddies, that's us, buddy boy. We're going to be a famous pair, going everywhere, doing everything. Here comes lucky old Unk and his buddy Boaz, said Boaz, saying what he'd hoped Earthings would be saying after a conquest. And there they go, happy as 2 birds. He chuckled and cooed about the happy bird-like pair, his smile withered. His smiles never last very long. Somewhere deep inside Boaz, he was worried sick. He was worried about losing his job. It had never been clear to him how he even landed the job. Such a great privilege. He didn't even know who gave him the swell job. Boaz didn't even know who was in command of the real commanders. He had never received an order, not from anyone who was superior to the real commanders. Boaz based his actions and all he did on the real commanders, on what could be best described as conversational tidbits. Tidbits circulated on the real commander level. Whenever the real commanders got together late at night, the tidbits were passed around with the beer and the crackers and cheese. There would be a tidbit, for instance, about the waste in the supply rooms, and another about the desirability of soldiers actually getting hurt and mad during jiu-jitsu training. Okay. Another about soldiers' shabby tendency to skip loops and lacing up their puttees. Boaz himself would pass these on without any idea as to their point of origin, and he would base his actions upon them. The execution of Stoney Stevenson by Unk had also been announced in his way. Suddenly, it had been a topic of conversation. Suddenly, the real commanders had placed Stoney under arrest. Boaz now fingered the control box in his pocket. Without actually touching a control, he took his place among the men he controlled, came to attention voluntarily, pressed a button, and relaxed his squad mates. He wanted to drink hard liquor very much, and he was entitled to liquor too, whenever he wanted it. Unlimited supplies of all kinds of liquor were flown from Earth regularly for the real commanders, and the officers could have all the liquor they wanted too, though they couldn't get the good stuff. What the officers drank was a lethal green liqueur made locally out of fermented lichens. But Boaz never drank. One reason he didn't drink was that he was afraid of alcohol and what it would do to impair his efficiency as a soldier. Another reason he didn't drink was that he was afraid. He was afraid that he'd forget himself and offer an enlisted man a drink. The penalty for a real commander who offered an enlisted man an alcoholic beverage was death. Yes, Lord, said Boaz, adding his voice to the hubbub of the relaxing men. 10 minutes later, Sergeant Brackman declared a recreation period. during which everyone was supposed to go out and play German bat-ball, the chief sport of the Army of Mars. Unk stole away. Unk stole away to Barrack 12 to look for the letter under the blue rock, the letter that his red-headed victim left and told him about. The barracks in the area were empty. The banner at the head of the mast before them was thin air. The empty barracks had been the home of a battalion of Martian Imperial commandos. Commandos had disappeared quietly in the dead of night a month before. They had taken off in their spaceships, their faces blackened, their dog tags taped as not to clink, and their destination a secret. The Martial Imperial commandos were experts at killing sentries with loops of piano wire. Their secret destination was the earthing moon, where they were going to start a war there. Unk found a big blue stone outside the furnace room of Barrack 12. The stone was turquoise. Turquoises were very common on Mars. The turquoise Unk found was a flagstone at a foot across. Unk looked under it. He found an aluminum cylinder with a screw cap. Inside the cylinder was a very long letter written in pencil. Unk did not know who had written it. He was in poor shape for guessing, since he knew the names of only 3 people: Sergeant Breckman, Boaz, and himself, Unk. Unk went into the furnace room and closed the door. He was excited, though he didn't know why. He began to read by the light from the dusty window. "Dear Unk," the letter began. "Dear Unk, they aren't much, God knows. But here are the things I know for sure. At the end, you will find a list of questions you should do your best to answer to find you should do your best to find the answer to these questions. The questions are important. I have thought harder about them than I ever have about the answers I already have. That is the first thing I know for sure. If the questions don't make sense, neither will the answers." All the things that the writer knew for sure were numbered, as though to emphasize the painful step-by-step nature of the game of finding things out for sure. There were 158 things the writer knew for sure. There had once been 185, but 17 had been crossed off. The second was, "I am a thing called alive." The third was, "I'm in a place called Mars." The fourth, "I'm in a part of a thing called an army." Fifth, "The army plans to kill other things called alive in a place called Earth." Of the 81 items, not one was crossed out. And then the first of the 81, the writer progressed to more subtle manners, and mistakes grew more numerous. Boaz explained and dismissed by the writer very early in the game. "Watch out for Boaz, Unk. He's not what he seems. Boaz has something in his right-hand pocket that hurts people in the head when they do something Boaz doesn't like." Number 48. "Some other people have things that can hurt you in the head too. You can't tell by looking who has one, so be nice to everybody." 71. "Unk, old friend. Almost everything I know for sure has come from fighting the pain from my antenna," said the letter to Unk. "Whenever I start to turn my head and look at something and the pain comes, I keep turning my head away because I know I am going to see something I'm not supposed to see. Whenever I ask a question and the pain comes, I know I've asked a really good question. Then I break the question into little pieces. I ask the pieces of questions, and I get answers to the pieces, and then I put the answers all together to get the answer to the big question. The more pain I get, the more I train myself to stand, and the more I learn. You are afraid of the pain now, Unk, but you won't learn anything if you don't invite the pain. And the more you learn, the gladder you will be to stand the pain." In the furnace room of the empty barrack, Unk laid the letter aside for a moment. He felt like crying, for the heroic writer's faith in Unk was misplaced. Unk knew he couldn't stand a fraction of the pain the writer had stood, couldn't possibly love knowledge that much. Even the little sample twinge they had given him in the hospital had been excruciating. He gulped for air now, like a fish dying on a riverbank, remembering the big pain Boaz had slammed him with in the barrack. He'd rather die than risk pain like that. His eyes watered. If he tried to speak, he would have sobbed. Poor Unc didn't want any trouble from anybody ever again. Whatever information he had gained from the letter, information gained by another man's heroism, he would use to avoid any more pain. Unc wondered if there were people who could stand more pain than others. He supposed this was the case. He supposed tearfully that he was especially sensitive in this regard. Without wishing the writer any harm, Unc wished the writer could feel just once the pains as Unc felt for them. Then maybe the writer would address his letters to somebody else. Unc had no way of judging the quality of the information contained in the letter. He accepted it all hungrily, uncritically, and in accepting it, Unc gained an understanding of life that was identical with the writer's understanding. Unc wolfed down a philosophy, and mixed in with the philosophy were gossip, history, astronomy, biology, theology, geography, psychology, medicine, and even a short story. Some random examples. Gossip. General Borders is drunk all the time. He is so drunk he can't even tie his shoelaces, so they will stay tied. Officers are as mixed up and as happy as anybody. You used to be one, Unc, with a battalion all your own. History, 26. Everybody on Mars came from Earth. They thought they would be better off on Mars. Nobody can remember what was so bad about Earth. Astronomy. Everything in the whole sky revolves around Mars once a day. Biology. New people come out of women when men and women sleep together. New people hardly ever come out of women on Mars because the men and the women sleep in different places. Theology. Somebody made everything for some reason. Geography. Mars is round, and the only city on it is called Phoebe. Nobody knows why it's called Phoebe. Psychology. Unc. The big trouble with dumb bastards is that they are too dumb to believe there is such a thing as being smart. Medicine. When they clean out a man's memory on this place called Mars, they don't really clean it out completely. They just clean out the middle of it, sort of. They always leave a lot of stuff in the corners. There is a story around about how they tried cleaning out a few memories completely. The poor people who had it done to them couldn't walk, talk, think, or anything. The only thing they could do to them was to housebreak them and teach them basic vocabulary of a few thousand words, give them jobs in the military or industrial public relations. The short story is, Unc, your best friend is Stoney Stevenson. Stoney is a big, happy, strong man, and he drinks a quart of whiskey a day. Stoney doesn't have an antenna in his head, and he can remember everything that ever happened to him. He pretends to be an intelligence scout, but he's one of the real commanders. He radio controls a company of assault infantrymen who will go in to attack a place on Earth called England. Stoney is from England. Stoney likes the army of Mars because there is so much to laugh about. Stoney laughs all the time. He heard what an 8-ball you were, Unc, so he came over to your barrack to have a look at you. He pretended he was a friend of yours so he could hear you talk. After a while, you got to trust him, Unc, and you told him some of your secret theories about what life on Mars was all about. Stoney tried to laugh, but then he realized that you had turned up some things that he didn't know anything about. He couldn't get over it, because he was supposed to know everything, and you weren't supposed to know anything. And then when you told Stoney a lot of the big questions he wanted answered, Stoney knew the answers to only about half of them. And Stoney went back to his barrack, and the questions he didn't know the answer to kept going round in his head. He couldn't sleep at night, even though he drank and drank and drank. He was catching on that somebody was using him, and he didn't have any idea who it was. He didn't even know why there had been an army on Mars in the first place. He didn't even know why Mars was going to attack Earth. And the more he remembered about Earth, the more he realized that the army on Mars didn't even have a chance. Not a chance of a snowball in hell. The big attack on Earth would be suicide for sure. Stoney wondered who he could talk to about this. And there wasn't anybody but you, Unc. So Stoney staggered out of bed about an hour before sunrise. He snuck over to your barrack, Unc, and he woke you up. He told you everything about Mars that he knew, and he said from now on he would tell you everything he found out. And you were supposed to tell him everything you found out. And every so often, you two would go off somewhere and try and fit things together. He gave you a bottle of whiskey, and you both drank from it, and Stoney said you were his best friend. He said you were the only friend he ever had on Mars, even though he laughed all the time, and he cried, and almost woke up people around your bunk. He told you to watch out for Boaz, and then he went back to his barrack and slept like a baby. From the letter, and from the point of the short story on, was proof of the effectiveness of the secret observation team of Stoney, Stevenson and Unc. From that point on, the things known for sure in the letter were almost introduced by phrases like Stoney says, you found out, Stoney told you, and you told Stoney. You and Stoney got raw and drunk on the rifle range one night, and you two crazy bums decided, blah blah blah. So the most important thing that the two crazy bums decided was that the man who was in actual command of everything on Mars was a big, genial, smiling, yodeling man who always had a big dog with him. This man and his dog, according to the letter to Unc, appeared in secret meetings of the real commanders of the army of Mars once about every 100 days. The letter said nothing about it because the writer knew nothing about it, but this man and his dog were Wilson Niles Rumford and Kazakh, the Hound of Space. And their appearances on Mars were not irregular, being chronosynclastic infundibulated. Rumford and Kazakh appeared as predictably as Halley's Comet. They appeared on Mars once every 111 days. As the letter to Unc said, according to Stoney, this big guy and his dog show up at meetings and just snow everybody under. He is a big charm boy, and by the time the meet is over, everybody is trying to think exactly the way he thinks. Every idea everybody has comes from him, and he smiles and smiles and he yodels in that fancy voice of his and fills everybody with new ideas. And then all the people at the meeting pass around these ideas as though they made them up themselves. He is crazy about the game of German bat-ball, and nobody knows what his name is. He just laughs, and if anybody asks him, he usually wears the uniform of the Parachute Ski Marines. But the real commanders of the Parachute Ski Marines swear they've never seen anybody like him at their secret meetings. Point 156 in the letter states to Unc, Unc, old pal, said the letter, every time you and Stoney find out something new, add it in this letter. Keep this letter well hidden, and every time you change its hiding place, be sure to tell Stoney where you put it, of course. That way, even if you go to the hospital and have your memory cleaned out, Stoney can tell you where to go and have your memory filled up again. Point 157 in the letter says, Unc, you know why you keep on going? You keep on going because you have a mate and a child. Almost nobody on Mars has either one. Your mate's name is Bee, and she is an instructress at the Schliemann Breathing School in Phoebe. Your son's name is Chrono. He lives in the grade school in Phoebe. And according to Stoney Stevenson, Chrono is the best German bat-ball player in the school. Like everybody else on Mars, Bee and Chrono have learned to get along alone. They don't miss you. They never think of you. But you have to prove to them that they need you in the biggest way possible. Point 158. Unc, you crazy son of a bitch, I love you. I think you are the cat's pajamas. When you get this little family of yours together, swipe a spaceship and go flying away somewhere peaceful and beautiful. Someplace where you don't have to take goofballs all the time to stay alive. And take Stoney with you. And when you get settled down, all of you can spend a lot of time together trying to figure out why whoever made everything go and who made it. All that remained for Unk to read in this letter was the signature. The signature was on a separate page. Before turning to the signature, Unk tried to imitate the character and appearance of the writer. The writer was fearless. The writer was such a lover of truth that he would expose himself to any amount of pain in order to add to his store of truth. He was superior to Unk and Stoney. He watched and recorded their subversive activities with love, amusement, and attachment. Unk imagined the writer was being a marvellous old man with a white beard and the build of a blacksmith. Unk turned the page to read the signature. "I remain faithfully yours," was the sentiment expressed above the signature. The signature itself filled almost the whole page. It was 3 block letters, 6 inches high and 2 inches wide. The letters were executed clumsily with a smeary black kindergarten embrace and exuberance. The signature spelled out the letters UNK, Unk. It was Unk's signature. Unk was the hero who had written the letter. Unk had written the letter to himself before having his memory cleaned out. It was literature in its finest sense, since it made Unk courageous, watchful, secretly free, and it made him his own hero in very trying times. Unk did not know that the man he had murdered at the stake was his best friend, Stoney Stevenson. He had known that he had killed himself. Oh no. Had he had known this, he might have killed himself. But the fate spared him that awful knowledge for many years. But it was fate that spared him this knowledge. I'm going to take a look behind me. Nice. Okay. When Unk got back to his barrack, jungle knives and bayonets were being honed. With harsh scree scores, everyone was sharpening a blade. And everywhere were sheepish smiles of a particular sort. The smiles spoke of sheep who, under proper conditions, could commit murder gladly. Orders had just been received that the regiment was to proceed with all possible haste to its spaceships, as the war with Earth has begun. The units of the Marshall Imperial Commandos had already obliterated Earthling installations on the Earthling moon. The commando rocket batteries firing from the moon were now giving every major city on Earth a taste of hell. And as dinner music for those tasting hell, Martian radios were beaming this message to Earth in a maddening sing-song. Brown man, white man, yellow man, surrender or die. Surrender or die. There we go. Note to self, don't read from a mobile phone while out in the rain.